Pattu, how did you calculate that target corpus? Because I think that's the crux of this episode, and I've
Oh,
been
yeah.
pushing on over many episodes.
Oh,
Like,
yes.
can we get people tabulated? If you're in this city, if you're going to an ICSE school or IB or government school, you need targets, Pattu. It's all about targets, like hard targets.
The problem here is the goalpost is moving all the time. See, in the case of retirement, you or your family set the benchmark for retirement planning. Because retirement planning is all about maintaining your current lifestyle after you retire. So it's all about you. Your lifestyle becomes the future target. Whereas that's why I said, don't worry about city, everything. You just say, if you're spending X, so that X will obviously vary from city to city, lifestyle to lifestyle. You invest 75 to 100% of X for retirement. So it's easy there. In this case, regardless of where the child is, the child's aspirations can define the goal. And the child's aspirations can change. And
Absolutely.
it can fluctuate wildly before it kind of stabilizes.
Right.
I would say big aspect of parenting is to, kind of expose the child to different kinds of different vocations.
Don't put this video off when you realize what it is about and you hear what the topic is on this episode of Let's Get Rich with Pattu. Because when you hear it, you might react by saying, hey, I'm too young for this. Or you might react by saying, I've made up my mind. I'm not going to let this happen to my life. But trust me, we urge you to continue listening and continue watching now that we're on multiple platforms, including YouTube, because there's a reason which I will reveal in a bit. So, all these 14 episodes before today's episodes have been about your emergency fund, your insurances that you need for different parts of your life, medical, life, accident, etc., etc. It's been about your retirement planning, whether normal retirement or early retirement. It's been about you. The key word is your, right? It's a very personal thing. And suddenly there's a stage in life when there's another your that enters your life, right? And of course, you figured this out. Today's episode is about children. We might get into the philosophy of having children. There are some people, and an increasing number today, who feel like they're just definitely not going to have children. But even for those, I urge you to continue listening because it's amazing how it could suddenly happen to you by mistake or otherwise, and how you can help others in your surroundings. And for those who think you're young enough to not think about this, there's a surprise lying in store for you with Pattu. Pattu, welcome. How are you doing? And what do you think about today's topic?
Hi, I'm doing great, and it's a very, very important topic. And I believe that once you have kids, I think planning for their future is more important than planning for your own retirement. There are many people who would disagree with me. They would say retirement planning is more important, but I'm maybe old school. I would put my children in front because that's what my parents did for me, and I will not hesitate to do the same for my son.
When Chinchu entered your life, had you thought about his being in your life, financially wise, of course, before you had him, or did you start thinking about it when he entered your life?
In my case, so I was going through this phase of making Excel calculators at that point in time. So I had this situation with my father. I had got over that and so on. So I was creating all these retirement planning calculators. At the time, I was doing all that almost day in, day out. And I was very familiar with the financial planning process for a particular goal at that time. So it became easy for me to plan for, what to do for his future. And I actually started investing for his future 1 month before he was born. Of course, I did not know the sex of the child then, but so it's 1 month before his birthday. And so it was easy for me to get started that way.
So here's my first question. Is 1 month before you have a child early enough?
No, no, it depends on a lot of things. So I would say that I think you should sit down and think about the kind of expenses that you're going to make for your children. So the first is vaccines, then you have preschool, then you have school admissions, then you will have all sorts of classes, tuition, chess class, shuttle class, this and that, and so on. All these much before college, right?
Right.
So I would say that one should seriously reconsider having children if they cannot afford school fees from their salaries.
Right. You said this on an earlier episode as well, Pattu, and it was a scary comment, and I think it's a very valid comment, right? But when you start even thinking about children, some people think about children really early in their lives, perhaps in their teens or early 20s. It might sound a little weird, but I wanted to have children as early as in my teens for whatever reason, right? I mean, everyone has a different life journey. Some people, my closest friends, even in their 40s, can't even start to think about having children, right? So everyone's journey is very different. But my question is, what can you do if you realize, yes, I'm going to have children and it's really early in your life? Or is it just something you should not think about? And then, what are the key factors apart from not being able to afford your school fees from your income that are other red flags that you should really have a hard think about? Okay, you can't have kids until these problems are solved.
No, I mean, I'm not saying it's a very personal thing, and we're not here to say do this, do that. But before I answer your question, my son started thinking about children when he's 10. And he said,
Really?
when I have children, I will make sure I will never send him to a kind of school that you're sending me to. So
I hope the school doesn't hear this episode.
so yes, he's yeah. I hope not. So he things. I mean, people are thinking about things very early. I would say that one will have to be mentally prepared for having children. Because the priorities will change, and we will have to think about them first. They come first, and we tend to I mean, when we are in a relationship and there are no kids, we can afford to be
Life is blissful.
Yeah, we can think
I
about
see my
us.
closest friends my age who are married couples, and what a different life they lead. It's ridiculously different. But anyway, keep going.
So yeah, so everything will change once the little thing comes into our life. So are we ready emotionally for that? Are we ready to give time for that? Because people say I've got admission for my child in a school and they will take care of the education. It doesn't work like that, because the school cannot take care of your child on a one-on-one basis, because they have 30, 40, 50 kids in a class. So you will have to put in that extra time, teaching the kid. You can't say I'm going to outsource it, get a tutor or arrange for tuition. It doesn't work like that. So are you ready for that kind of big change in your life? And I don't think we can ever prepare for it, but we must at least be ready to say that's going to happen, and I'm going to have to learn on the fly. I mean, parenting is learning on the fly. You can't go to any course, and every kid is different, every parent is different. But are you ready for that kind of journey is what we should ask ourselves, and before having children, preferably.
Right.
Because if I might say one more thing, I think in the movie 9 Months, there's a dialogue that says, you need a license to hunt, you need a license to drive a car, but you don't need a license to become a parent. So all sorts of people become parents. So we better be good ones.
Yeah. I think it's a license that you have the right to give yourself. Let's put it that way. Nobody else has a license to award it to you. But yeah, you should think about awarding yourself that license. My next question is, let's focus on what this show is all about, right? And I know we love the philosophy of it all, and there's some more coming up, but I'll warn you. But my first key financial question, right? In the previous episodes, you said, if you're spending X, try and put away X for investing for your future. And I think it was for retirement, and it was personal retirement, or at max you and your spouse. Did that by any chance also include kids?
Unfortunately, no.
So now it's getting the realm of impossible, Pattu. Like, how do we wrap our minds around it? If you're spending X, you're putting away X, that's 100% of your spends for your personal retirement. How do you find more money to invest for kids? It's a big problem.
Ideally X, but I would say at least 75% of X, maybe. But we can always start. We only start with what we can, but that should be the goal. So, yeah, this is really tough. And that is why I tell people, okay, one child, yes, it's some kind of need that we have to procreate. Absolutely fine. But the second child, be very, very careful. Because if, I mean, everything will become 2x. There are two colleges to take care of, two school tuitions to pay, and you can't put one child in front of the other. They're both the
They're
same.
equal.
Yeah, and you may end up, even if you don't want to emotionally, you may end up, because of finances, you may end up paying more for one child and not having enough for the second child.
Yeah,
You don't want
I know that for a fact.
to get into that kind of situation. So please think very, very carefully before having the second one. Of course, today many people get into assisted pregnancies. So for them,
They don't have control over that.
yeah, you get a twin from day one. So and that makes it a lot more difficult. But yeah, I mean that's okay. What happens beyond our control is beyond our control. But we still need to ask this question if you're going to plan a second pregnancy. So
Did you think
yeah.
after you had Chinchu about a second child? And was it the finances that put you off?
No, it's a long story, but I can give you a gist of it.
Sure.
So Chinchu was assisted,
Okay.
and my wife nearly died
Oof.
because of trying to get pregnant, and
I have
because
my answer. Then never again.
so yeah, you have your answer. So that's a long, I mean, I could write about it, but maybe she should talk about it. But yeah, that's the reason why we said, okay, we have one. And one person told me that influenced me a lot. I'm the only child from my parents. And one person, one colleague many years ago said, I have one kid and I don't want to bring another kid and divide my love between the two. I want all my love to, just on that one kid. Whether it makes sense or not to many people, I don't know, but it made a lot of sense to me. So,
Yeah.
and so we stopped right there.
I think it has so much to do with how you're brought up and if you had siblings or not, right? And it's a world of difference. I had an elder sister. When Natasha and I thought about having kids, first she had an elder sister. We always thought about two, and our argument was perhaps that child also needs a companion like we did growing up. You know, there's so many things and there's so many permutations and combinations. So yes, it's a very personal thing, and unfortunately, you've answered my most important question coming from my perspective of having two kids. Does everything become 2x?
Yeah. And it could be more because each kid could have different aspirations. One aspiration can be much more expensive than the other. So it's very difficult. You may have to put them in a different class, different tuitions. So things can be very, very different. So it's more than 2x is the minimum, I would say.
All right. So let's dial it back and start talking about money and finances. You started when Chinchu was a month away from being born. Tell me what you did back then and what you would suggest doing now in today's day and age in 2023.
So I have always talked about asset allocation as the most important point of an investment portfolio. So asset allocation refers to how much of equity you hold, how much of fixed income you hold, and any other asset classes that you hold. But fixed income and equity are more than enough. So with respect to my retirement, I had started investing for retirement before I actually started planning for retirement, because that's true for most of us, because the EPF or the NPS mandatory deduction that happens in the case of salaried folk, that's going to start from the day we join a organization, and so the retirement planning starts then. So for many people, the asset allocation for retirement would be skewed in favor of fixed income. They will have a lot of fixed income and very little equity to start with. And for me, it took 10 years to overtake the fixed income in my retirement portfolio. But because I was already planning or making these Excel calculators for retirement planning, I knew the importance of asset allocation from day one for my son's portfolio. So I started investing 60% in equity, 40% in fixed income for him. So
from day one.
From day one. 60% in a equity mutual fund, set of equity mutual funds, and 40% in a PPF account I opened. So So that's essentially how the portfolio began.
Right. So PPF seems to be a very common thread among all parents, right? I think my parents and my wife's parents open PPF accounts for our kids, and then from day one we start putting in how much ever we can, a maximum of 1,50,000 a year, and then of course you're saying perhaps 60% or maybe more than that amount can be in equity in whatever form. Does anything change then for the first few years, or you just continue with that same plan until?
Yes, I think for the first few years, you can definitely hold on to that kind of asset allocation, and then you kind of slowly taper down the equity towards the college deadline. Because in my case, what happened was I was able to invest much more than what I wanted. So I was able to hit my initial target corpus by the time he was 10 years of age.
Pattu, how did you calculate that target corpus? Because I think that's the crux of this episode, and I've been pushing on over many episodes.
Oh, yes.
Can we get people tabulated? If you're in this city, if you're going to an ICSE school or IB or government school, you need targets, Pattu. It's all about targets, like hard targets.
The problem here is the goalpost is moving all the time. See, in the case of retirement, you or your family set the benchmark for retirement planning. Because retirement planning is all about maintaining your current lifestyle after you retire. So it's all about you. Your lifestyle becomes the future target. Whereas that's why I said, don't worry about city, everything. You just say, if you're spending X, so that X will obviously vary from city to city, lifestyle to lifestyle. You invest 75 to 100% of X for retirement. So it's easy there. In this case, regardless of where the child is, the child's aspirations can define the goal, and the child's aspirations can change, and
absolutely
it can fluctuate wildly before it kind of stabilizes.
Right.
I would say big aspect of parenting is to kind of expose the child to different kinds of different vocations, and kind of push the child gently to kind of make up his or her mind, say, this is what I want to do in life.
Right.
It's very hard. It can happen only after 8th standard, 9th standard or something like that. But if we do that, if the child says, I want to do this, everything becomes so easy. If the child says, I don't know what to do with my life, which is perfectly fine from an emotional point of view, which is absolutely fine. I think that's okay to do that.
Which is a very large part of our population of kids. It's very tough in this day and age to figure out what you want.
So if you're going to then the point is, then you will have to push them to make a choice. I remember reading somewhere that Jatin Das, who I think is a painter, who's the father of Nandita Das, he insisted their children take 1 year off after 12th standard.
It's a big trend in the West, Pattu, I used to go trekking in the Himalayas, and the amazing number of foreigners you find who says, yeah, I'm in my gap year. I've taken a year off. I've finished the 12th. And it's amazing. And we just don't have this concept in India where you go discover the world and you figure out what you really want to do. But I guess in India, there's so many stresses. There's always about that next exam you have to prepare for. Who's going to pay for that gap year? It's a big problem, right? And in lots of these Western countries, you start getting these allowances from the government, or you work for 1 month and you can spend a year in India, right? Anyway, I digress, but please go ahead on Nandita's example.
So she said that made a big difference in her life. That took away all the pressure, and she could spend time on listening to her calling. And that's, I mean, of course, there's no guarantee you listen to the calling will reach you or something like that, but at least that gives her, gives some space. But the problem is, yes, you said yes, rightfully, many families cannot afford to do that here. And even if they can afford to do that, many families won't take that risk.
Absolutely. It's not an Indian thing to do.
Exactly. They would say, oh, the relatives are speaking bad of you. The neighbors are speaking. What are you doing? Simply sitting at home.
How much freedom are you giving your child? How do you keep a track what they're doing? Yeah. So it's a very Indian thing of controlling. Sorry, I lost track a bit. What were we discussing? How did you calculate the target for Chinchu?
So I haven't, I would say. So what I want to say is that since most of us would not prefer giving that gap, we should try to push our children as gently as possible into choosing an occasion, of course, and tell them you can always change. So as of now, fortunately or unfortunately, I think my son also wants to become an academic. So that kind of tells me how to plan, what are the kind of colleges, how, if he doesn't get this, what is the next option, and so on. So I now have a mental map of, and also that tells me the expenses.
Right.
So that's how I did it. Of course, I still have a feeling that he might change his mind anytime. And if he does that, we can always, of course, change plan and so on. But it is a moving target, and you should somehow come up with some number, some approximate number. Let's say 10 lakhs. Start with that. Make a beginning.
10 lakhs by year 10?
So, no, 10 lakhs today. 10 lakhs is the current cost today of college, of a 3-year or a 4-year undergraduate.
That's it? Really?
It depends a lot on where you study.
Yeah.
It depends a lot. But it depends also on how the child is. If the child is a topper or a very good above average performer, I would say make it 25 lakhs.
Right.
But, you have to, and of course, it also depends on how much you can afford. The problem is, I did some rough calculations because I know you would expect me to give a simple thumb rule like the X percentage of X.
I mean,
many people liked it. And just a quick point is that FreeFinCal and Pattu have not been associated with the basics and easy things that a beginner can go to. They always say, go read this. After you have done the basics, go to FreeFinCal. The podcast has now given me an avenue to talk about the basics without the math, without the graphs. So I'm happy that there are people recommending the podcast saying it doesn't have the fluff, it doesn't have the... So as a thumb rule, 10 lakhs today, inflating at 10% a year. 10% inflation for education is the minimum. I would say it actually is higher, but 10% is minimum. So 10 lakhs increasing year on year at 10% a year after 10 years would become about 26 lakhs.
Per child. Right. See, I love benchmarks, right? I love targets. At least it gives me a starting point, and then you can do the math backwards.
You can always multiply now. So 10 lakhs, 10%, 10 years becomes 26 lakhs.
On that note, and what you just said before that, Pattu, about how this podcast is helping the basics. If you truly like this, we are amateur YouTubers. We don't know how this really works. I see a lot of YouTubers saying, hit the like button, share, subscribe. Please do these things. It really helps. And I'm sure it's asking for very little so that it helps other people, right? And on that note, on this topic of saving for education, it's time for philosophy, Pattu, if you would indulge me. Have you ever thought of this as a parent of what our responsibilities are to a child financially and when do they stop? Because I have varying views from my family, right? They say, no, your only job as a parent is to provide till they are fully educated. Then it's their life. And yet it's a very Indian thing to say, oh, I'm sure that's not enough, right? How do we build a largesse? How do we start thinking about, it just never stops and this just keeps adding to the pressure and the stress. And what are your thoughts about this entire topic?
I get very emotional about this because I will not be sitting here before you if it were not for the sacrifices of my parents. I finished my school in 1992. I got a proper full-fledged job only in early 2006.
Wow.
Right?
14 years later.
Yeah. So I was earning sometimes a lot, sometimes very little. But
after 2006?
No, before. In between. Right. In between. Because I was getting fellowships, stipends, right, whatever. And so on. And my father retired when I was my first year of PhD. and my stipend at the time was $2,500 a month or something like that. And even as late as 2005, my entire scholarship, fellowship, whatever you want to call it, was spent on travel, because I was traveling far outside the city and coming back every day. And I was not contributing anything to my home. I was married by then. And
Yeah.
My parents said, don't worry, I know you will be good in life. I know you'll come to something, significant in life. We will support you until that happens. They did it, no questions asked. And it's very unfortunate that my father could not see much of my work.
Success.
Yeah, success. That's the right word. If you can, yeah. But without them, I would be nowhere. I would be working my ass off in some kind of corporate job, 16, 17 hours a day. But now I'm in academia. I'm doing what I love. I love my job. Teaching is what really turns me on. So I would not do that, be here without that support. So that is the reason why I keep saying, the moment you have children, they are your number one priority. They come before retirement planning. There can be no two things about it. Otherwise, don't bring children into the world. I mean, I have strong views on that. See, this is the thing. The people who disagree, many of them are not married.
Yeah.
So I would say you don't know. And the people who are, kind of my age, 30-ish, 40-ish kind of thing, with children, they agree with me because they know. So
it's a life-changing experience once that human being enters your life and everything becomes secondary. And I know exactly what you mean. So I'm struck by this, something we said earlier in this episode about how the Western system is to send their kids away for a year, a gap year. And I think I'm very proud of the Indian system, which says these lines to their kids, right? No matter what, we've got your back, right? We know you'll do well. And so our financial planning, and that's what it perhaps comes down to, needs to take that into account, right? We need to support our kids as much as possible. It does not stop at that, giving them a college education, or it does not stop at it. It perhaps will go beyond. And perhaps in your case, Chinchu wants to enter academia. His earning capacity will come later, right? For doctors, it comes later. And there's so much to talk about that, the philosophy of this all. It is a task that becomes life-changing. And perhaps on that note, we'll take a break. There's so much else to talk about on investing for children, how to think about it, how to plan for it, what products we can talk about, and perhaps a little bit of math as well and philosophy on the next episode of Let's Get Rich with Pattu. Pattu, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Bye-bye.